Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that the new assistant director of the FBI, Buchanan, arrives with a clipped suit and a clipped tone, the sort of person whose approval is measured in nods and paper trails, and who makes Vernon swallow the word apology like a bitter pill. News of Buchanan's presence spreads through the precinct like cold air through open windows, formalities tighten, mistakes are catalogued, and every misplaced comma in a report becomes a potential indictment. Vernon sits at his desk and looks at Jacob the way a man looks at a clock that has stopped, regretful, impatient, certain of the time that's been wasted. Jacob, who had listened to Cat and allowed procedure to bend like a reed in the wind, feels the weight of a thin rope slipping from his hands. He can see what Vernon sees, that an error in sequence now hangs over Chelsea like a storm cloud, but remorse does not alter the fact that the chain of custody is stained and the interrogations were not done in order. Buchanan's arrival does not forgive, it magnifies. Chelsea's abduction by Allison had been sudden enough to make the world after it feel like a photograph burned at the edges. For Chelsea, being found and having Allison locked up in a cell did not mean safety. Instead, it rewired her expectations of the world. She had been held, threatened, and told things that lodged into her memory like splinters. Being proved right, the police had the woman who took her, is a small victory when the skin of trust has been sliced. In the weeks after Allison's arrest, Chelsea carries a silence like a second skin. Nicole is there in the small hours, a steady voice in the static. She brings tea that goes cold on the coffee table, folds Chelsea's hair off her face, reads the same passage from stupid novels because Chelsea cannot bear advice. Nicole refuses to let the silence be a vacuum, but there are limits to how much a person can be held when they recoil from their own rescue. Chelsea refuses to look at Allison. In court, in the visiting room, in the single chilled glass booth where the guards allow two figures to see each other, Chelsea cannot bring her gaze to land on that face. The mechanics of memory and trauma are practical here. Seeing Allison would be to restart the machine that had been turned off by the rescuers. Each time someone mentions Allison, the air hardens around Chelsea's ribs. She tries to give a statement, to marshal facts into testimony, but her sentences are brittle, collapsing under their own weight. She can say the colors of a shirt, the way Allison's voice would flip from syrupy to steel, the number of steps in the stairwell, but she cannot say why Allison chose her, cannot say how it felt to be told she would be found no matter where she hid. Each mention triggers the image of Allison's face, close enough to breathe on her skin, and the memory does not keep to its bounds. Nicole has taken on the role of interpreter between Chelsea and the system. She knows the language of hospitals and prescriptions. She knows the language of someone who will not speak. She sits with Chelsea during interviews, touches her hand so she will not reach for the door, negotiates with nurses and detectives. There are moments when she grows impatient. Anyone who sees the world for what it is and moves to fix it will feel the impatience. But Nicole's impatience is not with Chelsea's fear. It is with the machinery that insists on logic and evidence. When Chelsea's mind is a house that still smells like smoke. Chelsea's refusal to cooperate is not obstinacy so much as a protective reflex. The act of looking at Allison is not simply identifying a perpetrator, it is an acknowledgement that the world's ugliness has a face, and that face can be repeated. Relationships fracture around that refusal. Some call it obstruction. Nicole calls it survival. Visits to the detention center are always misaligned in time, like two trains that nearly meet but never do. The visiting room is a rectangle of hard light and hard chairs, an old fluorescent buzzing like a mosquito. Allison sits behind a glass partition that reflects Chelsea's face back at her in smudged relief. The guards are efficient, the paperwork quicker than they should be. Allison leans into the glass as if it were a confessional. Her voice keeps the soft cadence of someone who has practiced intimacy like a performance. She smiles sometimes, a small curl that should never have weight, and then her expression shifts to a promise. "We'll see each other again," Allison says once during a visit. There is no theatrics, only the plain fact of the statement. Don't run. You can't run from me. I'll find you wherever you go. The word find hangs in the room like a smell. Chelsea's heart does not so much race as stop and then decide to beat a different rhythm. The words are not a threat in the melodramatic sense, they are a factual claim, as if Allison were discussing distance and coordinates. The way she says it, Chelsea believes her. Chelsea flees the visitor's room after that. She runs through a parking lot, shoes slapping, breath hot and raw, and Nicole becomes frantic because the act of fleeing is a person's only available logic. Move away from the place where you were most helpless. Nicole catches up, breathless and angry and soft all at once, and pulls Chelsea into the back seat of her car while her own heartbeat becomes a metronome of fear and fury. The image is ordinary: two women, one with hair in tangles, one with knuckles on fabric. But the scene holds the intensity of people who have been forced into roles they never signed up for. After that night, Chelsea begins to sleep badly, not the simple insomnia of being awake but a sleep full of incursions. She dreams of Allison with machine-like consistency. Dreams fold reality into variations of the same abuse. In one dream, Allison binds Chelsea's hands with lace, claims them as a bride, and the ceremony becomes an exercise in compulsion. The dream is not sexual in the warmed, consenting sense, it is a theft of agency. In another dream, Allison stands at the foot of Chelsea's bed making domestic plans in a tone as casual as a grocery list: how they will arrange pillows, what colors will bring light into their home. Chelsea wakes as if some intimate boundary has been breached so thoroughly that waking up feels like surfacing from a pool to find the furniture of your living room replaced by someone else's. Sleep is no longer rest. It is a place where nightmares have interior decorators. Martin watches Chelsea and remembers his own ghosts. Kenny's death, a bruise in his life that never quite faded, left Martin with a particular kind of wariness. He knows what it is to have an absence occupy a room like an extra person. He knows the particular physics of trauma, that a mind will loop on a single image like a scratched record. Martin has a kind of clean sorrow. He has learned to keep his hands still when someone else is unraveling. When he comes to Chelsea's apartment, he brings food that she will, for a while, not eat, and he tells the stories of ordinary things, the way rain used to smell on his mother's porch, the small triumph of fixing a lawnmower. Martin's method is to occupy the world with the specifics of life, to make it an argument against the hollowness Allison would insist on. Chelsea listens sometimes, says nothing other times, and Martin leaves with a lighter step because he can sometimes, with his practical ministrations, create a small island of normal. The worry in his face is not theatrical, it is raw and near, and he cannot make it disappear by offering tea. Jacob's regret is not an abstract thing, it manifests in small procedural nightmares. He keeps replaying the moment he ignored the order of interviews at Kat's suggestion. He let emotion shortcut protocol. For a man who had once been proud of doing things the right way, the knowledge that protocol had been violated feels like a personal betrayal. He carries the memory of what the oversight cost, a shaky chain of evidence, a gap in the statement sequences, the way a judge's eyes might narrow when defense counsel points out a misstep. Vernon warns him in the tone of a man who has seen how small cracks become chasms. "We'll have trouble getting a confession," Vernon says. "Allison will deny everything. She knows how to talk, she's practiced deception. And with the mistakes on the file, Buchanan won't be forgiving." Buchanan's name is like a weather advisory. He asks questions that feel surgical. He reads witness lists like menus he does not like. He has a way of framing a problem that forces people to see the edges they would prefer to ignore. For Jacob, Buchanan's scrutiny becomes the gravity of a cold planet, inevitable and crushing. It is not only that Buchanan will not ignore the mistake, it is that Buchanan will use it to test the case's integrity. Vernon tells Jacob, bluntly, that he needs to find another angle, some other evidence that will not be undermined by a technicality. "And if you don't," Vernon adds, "Chelsea might go over the edge." The phrase is neither idle nor rhetorical. It brings to mind a woman who cannot sleep, who flinches when doors close, who finds her days shortened by fear. Jacob imagines the legal timeline: detention hearing, motion to dismiss, the defense arguing that the evidence was collected improperly. If the judge decides in the defense's favor, Allison could walk free on a technicality. The possibility seems absurd to Chelsea, who carries the psychic imprint of being confined, but the law is not easily persuaded by emotional weight. It requires proof, and proof is forensics and timelines and witnesses whose statements were gathered according to a particular script. Jacob begins circling for another way in. He reviews surveillance tapes, not trusting his memory. He interviews the transportation drivers who had reported an odd passenger, the gas station clerk who remembered Allison buying coffee in a particular brand, the person on the periphery who might have seen a license plate. He combs through phone data, but the chain possesses holes where Allison's GPS pings drop out as if she had intentionally moved through gaps. Each lead creates more questions. Why did Allison leave Townsend's grocery at exactly 3:37 p.m.? Who was she meeting? The more Jacob looks, the more layers he finds, and some layers are deliberate. Allison had not been careless. Allison's approach to risk is a study in contradiction. She is at once brittle and cunning. In the detention center she plays the role of someone wronged by circumstance. She can switch to the practiced victim, eyes rimmed with contrition, voice tremulous in a way that suggests some private hurt. But she can also be clinical, as if she were a sculptor chipping away at her audience. She writes letters that go nowhere and yet create unease. She speaks to the guards in a way that tests their empathy. There are rumors about her past: a man left in a religious chapel, an obsession with the idea of possession. Rumors are not evidence, but they are texture, and texture influences how people remember. Madison is a fault line in this arrangement of people. Her days are swallowed by the hospital's emergencies. The fluorescent lights of the ER refuse to let her carry the softness Chelsea needs. She is a doctor whose hands are trained to steady, but the demands of her job, a code to save whatever breath is left in a body, make her life an oscillation between competence and horror. She is there when Chelsea returns from the visit to Allison, but not always. She is holding another life in her hands when Chelsea needs an anchor. The distance frays things. It invites Allison's envy. Allison knows the small places that make chaos. She watches not only Chelsea but the architecture of Chelsea's life, relationships, professional commitments, the soft places where someone might be held. In the months leading up to the abduction, Allison had watched from a distance as Chelsea's life arranged itself. There is no need to invent the rest. Obsession needs only an opening. Madison's absence, the long hours with drama patients and codes that leave her hollow-eyed and unwilling to come home early, becomes a kindling for Allison. She can narrate an intimacy to Chelsea that Madison is too exhausted to rescript. Allison's jealousy is not the straightforward kind that scorches and reveals. It is quiet, a steady pressure that makes little demands until they become the main business of someone's life. Bill and Danny, Chelsea's parents, exist in a kind of suspended anger. They watch the news and see the woman who threatened their daughter being escorted into court. They feel vindicated and furious and small. Bill, practical and short-tempered, wants a quick, visible response: jail time, restrictions, a security detail. Danny sits at the table and tries to measure the scales of privacy and protection. They both worry about Madison, about whether their daughter should be allowed to continue seeing her. There are conversations laced with fear. What if Allison is released? What if someone else is watching? What if Chelsea chooses poorly? What if the world never lets her choose at all? The question of whether to limit Chelsea's relationship is not simple. Madison's love for Chelsea is real, not an abstraction. Chelsea's love is a shelter that Allison could never replicate through force. But love under such stress is not a clear decision. Bill and Danny fear being complicit in Chelsea's further harm if they allow her to meet someone whose schedule is so demanding. The debate is a mirror for a larger problem. When trauma disrupts someone's autonomy, where do loved ones draw the line between protection and control? The family's attempt to answer this becomes another pressure point that Allison knows how to exploit. Vernon and Jacob work through the labyrinth of evidence with the thin patience of men who know their careers may hinge on a single hearing. They revise timelines until they ache. Jenna, a forensic analyst who drinks black coffee like a sacrament, runs fingerprints through systems again. The lab responds, a partial print, A smear in a place that looks like it could be guilty but will be fought by attorneys as ambiguous. The legal side becomes a game of probability. Buchanan inserts himself into that game with a precise cool that annoys and steadies everyone at once. He asks for warrants, for permits, for the sort of documentation that could reduce a defense lawyer's rhetorical flourish into a dry list. Jacob starts to like Buchanan, the way one might like the surgeon who promises to stitch what has been torn. But there is a distance there that is not friendship. Chelsea's world shrinks and swells in alternating tides. Some days she can speak with a brittle logic about Allison's methods, how Allison would plant little reminders of her presence, a song lyric scrawled on a napkin, a stray hair in a scarf. Other days Chelsea cannot lift her head from the pillow. She lies on the couch with the light of her apartment streaming in and thinks of that phrase Allison used in the detention center: "Don't run. You can't run from me." It is both a vow and an instruction, and its persistence is fertile. Chelsea's dreams make her wake with small injuries, scratches on her palm from where she had dug her nails into her skin. She begins to keep the television on, low, to drown the quiet. Counting the same numbers doesn't help. Worry creeps in like ivy around the edges of her rational thought. Jacob watches these things and notes them. He knows trauma complicates testimony. It can both sharpen memory and fracture it. He wants Chelsea to give him something he can use in court, some statement that will snap around Allison like a noose. But he is also discovering that some statements cannot be forced because they are not just facts, they are the naming of a particular fear that, once named, will orbit the victim like a magnet. There is a legal calculus to that naming. Chelsea's refusal to look at Allison is both a human cry and a lawyer's nightmare. Jacob meets with an attorney from the prosecutor's office who instructs him on the necessity of corroborative evidence, surveillance footage, third-party witnesses, physical proof of the abduction, phone records that put Allison in the area at the time. The conversation is full of clauses and conditionals. It becomes a rehearsal for the hearing that will determine Allison's fate. The defense attorney, deferential in public, acerbic in counsel rooms, begins to sketch a narrative of their own, that Allison is a woman with a checked past and a propensity for attention, but that the state's file is frayed. If Jacob cannot produce airtight evidence, the defense will argue reasonable doubt as a pragmatic charter for freedom. The attorney knows what he is doing. He has worked the system long enough to see the ways in which a technical mistake can feel like a door swinging open. Jacob begins to see, in the defense's calm calculations, the possibility of Allison walking free. It is a thought that enters the precinct like a live wire, sparking panic. The panic propels action. Jacob doubles back to old leads and finds a clerk at a motel who remembers a woman leaving at dawn with a paper cup in her hand. A municipal worker near the river remembers a coat hung on a bench where the currents of foot traffic are slow. Each memory is a thread. Jacob and Vernon tie threads together with the stubbornness of men who have to be right in order to sleep. They subpoena phone records, track purchases, put in for a warrant to search a storage locker Allison had used years ago. The locker yields a box of things that are neither damning nor trivial: Polaroids of a smiling woman standing in front of places Chelsea frequented, ticket stubs to shows Chelsea attended, and a small journal with entries that read like love notes written by someone who believed themselves to be entirely in touch with another person's mind. The Polaroids complicate matters in a new way. They show Allison watching Chelsea from afar, not always in a predator's pose but sometimes like an admirer at a theater. The emotional valence is chilling. It proves intent in a way that forensic swabs could not. Jacob knows intent is powerful in court, but only if it can be presented without the sticky residue of procedural error. He creates a mosaic of documentation, journal entries that match dates to the time Allison had proximity to Chelsea, purchase receipts that show Allison had been in specific neighborhoods, a surveillance photo from a convenience store showing Allison near Chelsea 2 days before the abduction. Each piece is a bead threaded on a fragile string. Despite these finds, the legal machine remains mercilessly practical. Buchanan insists on full reports, diagrams, and defined chains. He asks for a memo that explains how the evidence meets the legal standard for continued detention. Jacob writes long memos, considering not only the physical items but how to present them in a narrative that a judge will accept. Vernon teaches him the rhetoric of the courtroom, what makes an objection flinch and what makes a judge lean forward. They craft their case with care, knowing that beyond the immediate legal considerations there is a human cost. Chelsea's body and mind bear the bruise of the event, and the resolution of the case will leave scars regardless of its outcome. Allison remains a study in controlled unpredictability. Her courtroom behavior alternates between calm and theatrically broken. She will cry softly at certain moments as if some internal project were being undone, and then she will fix her hair as if nothing had happened. The contradictions make a jury uncertain. People like contradiction because they humanize those we would prefer to demonize. If Allison's performance in public is a mask, then it is a convincing one. Meanwhile, Chelsea's life becomes a set of routines designed to buffer against unpredictability. She begins carrying a small flashlight and a noisy keychain that could draw attention if she needed help. She changes her routines altogether: different routes to work, different coffee shops, different parks. The act of changing seems rational, a practical defense, but it also feeds Allison's prophecy. When you change everything, you can sometimes feel like you have been moving in a circle. There is a scene that captures the way small acts become defenses. Chelsea sits in a diner late, nursing coffee, headphones distracting her with a playlist of songs that remind her less of Allison than of quiet. A man approaches and asks for a cigarette and starts a trivial conversation about the weather. Chelsea answers without enthusiasm. Martin sits across from her, and his presence is an argument against the totalizing fear that wants to claim her. Madison calls, and for a moment Chelsea's voice is steady. It is one of those stuttered recoveries where life seems to align. But later, when Chelsea goes to bed, the dreams come back as they always do, elaborate and invasive, and she wakes in the middle of the night with the lamp still on and the television talking about banalities. The story's early sequences are dominated by the slow, methodical work of the system trying to make sense of the human damage done. There are heated meetings where legal standards are recited like liturgies and where prosecutors and detectives align their methods. There are quieter, more desperate conversations where friends and family try to convince Chelsea that cooperation will not erase her but will give her power. They are right and wrong both. Power in the legal sense requires articulation. Power in the emotional sense is a medicine that takes time to be effective. All the while Allison's shadow, the threat of her reach, seems to expand. The most chilling detail is not the violence she had enacted but the precision of her promises. She had not shouted from the roof or left obvious marks. She had whispered the inevitability of meeting and put enough obsession into the phrasing to make the statement true in the psychic sense. It is the kind of menace that does not so much shout as suggest, that does not so much hold a weapon as rearrange a person's sense of safety. Jacob Ray reads his notes at night and tries to stitch the legal fabric before the judge's gavel drops. He thinks about the mistake he made at Kat's prompting and vows to never allow an emotional impulse to guide procedure again. The sense of being watched by defense counsel, by Buchanan, by the facts themselves doggedly follows him. He understands what is at stake in a way that goes beyond career. Chelsea's life tilts on whether the law recognizes the pattern Allison created. This knowledge is not purely abstract, it has a physical weight on his chest when he sleeps. As the hearing draws closer, tensions ratchet up everywhere. Dave, a retired detective who works on consulting cases and sometimes drops by for a smoke outside the precinct, tells Jacob that the law is a slow animal and sometimes cruelty rides on the back of its slowness. That remark has the ring of truth. Chelsea's life is being processed by a system that can feel like molasses when a person needs flame. The press begins to pay attention in small doses. A camera flashes outside the courthouse. A neighbor posts a sympathetic but ill-informed commentary online. None of these things make a difference in court, but they compound the personal pressure for everyone involved. And then, just when the machinery seems to have reached a rhythm, a new detail slides into the story like a secret note passed during a lecture. A witness calls, shaking, and says they saw a woman meeting Allison at a bus depot 3 weeks before the abduction. The caller is uncertain, a human being contending with memory's fog. But that uncertainty is a kind of lead. Jacob pursues the call like an animal to a sound, hoping that something will line up: time, place, a receipt. The more he chases, the more a pattern emerges that could either be their salvation or another dead end. The narrative of the first phase of this unfolding drama is not neat. It is a braided thing: Chelsea's fear and slow recovery, Jacob's error and frantic restitution, Vernon's stern mentorship, Buchanan's cold oversight, Allison's menace, Madison's absence, and Bill and Danny's parental panic. The real tension is the way these human elements interact with the machinery of justice. Each person's motives: protection, ambition, jealousy, fear, love, bend the story in different directions. In the end, the question is not merely whether Allison will be convicted but whether the system will move in time to protect a woman whose nights are full of someone else's plans. As the court date approaches and the evidentiary net tightens, the possibility that Allison might be released becomes a specter. Chelsea imagines doors opening and a woman stepping out with a small smile, the promise of being found echoing like a bad song. Jacob knows that without a clear, irrefutable trail of evidence, the defense will pick at their case and find the places where it is weakest. He and Vernon map strategies in the quiet hours, trying to find a balance between momentum and caution, between zeal and the need for bulletproof documentation. The precinct becomes an anxious hive, each person a worker driven not by industry but by fear. Then, late one night, Jacob receives a phone call that ambushes him with immediacy: a motion from the defense, filed at the last minute, arguing for bail on technical grounds. The words feel like a physical blow. He reads them twice. The motion cites the procedural error he regrets, the misordered statements, the chain of custody gap. It proposes that with the evidence in its current state, detention is not justified. The hearing is scheduled for the next morning. He does not sleep. He rewrites his memos until dawn. Vernon paces. Chelsea learns of the hearing and the news is a chemical reaction. The cold fear that had been simmering flares. Nicole sits with her and tries to explain, but there are no consoling facts that can change the visceral reaction of a woman who was told she could not escape. Martin brings his steady presence. Madison rearranges her schedule to be there if she can, but the legal process is its own animal, indifferent to longing. The courtroom will be a place where all those human elements and bureaucratic precision collide. The first phase of the story crescendos toward it like a held breath. Each action so far, every journal entry found in a storage locker, every photograph, every hesitant testimony will be measured by the judge's standards, and everyone waits, suspended, for an outcome that could either bind Allison closer to justice or loosen the net until she slips free. The night before the hearing, Chelsea sits by the window, watching the city lights, feeling very small and very visible at once. Outside, a bus breathes in the darkness, a metal lung. The promise Allison made that she would find Chelsea sits in the quiet like an ache. The courthouse looms tomorrow, procedural and inevitable, and no one yet knows which way it will swing.